Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We got a great, straightforward topic for you today. What's your best paranormal story? A little not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. In second grade, I saw black leather shoes floating in midair in the basement bathroom of my elementary school. I stared and stared, and they just floated. More recently, I work in a hotel. Was doing evening shift. While taking the elevator alone, a quarter fell from the ceiling, and there's no vent or holes or anywhere it could have fallen from. Later on the same evening, when I got into the elevator alone again, there was another quarter balanced on infinitesimally small ledge of an elevator mirror. I have both quarters in my wallet. They're my spooky mystery quarters. I'll repeat my sister since I don't have one. She took my 2 to 3-year-old niece to the restroom at a pizza restaurant that was located inside a former hospital that converted to some offices and restaurant space. She knew full well this place had a reputation for being haunted, so she kept the stall door open while my niece did her business, and as they were leaving, my niece looked in on the spot near the sinks. So then she started asking my sister why a little girl was there. She was saying, "Mama? Where's my mama?" Needless to say, there wasn't one perceivable to adults. Two friends and I were hiking in the Olympic Mountains in Washington, just in the middle of nowhere, some random pull-off we happened to see. Haven't seen anyone on the highway for about 2 hours seemed far out enough. We get to the top of this peak, and that being watched feeling was almost immediate. The area was fairly flat and open, with just very slim, tall trees spread around so you could still see everything for a pretty good distance. Anyways, we were all just telling each other it's just in our heads, the birds, small wildlife, etc. But after about 15 minutes, we all heard the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest my entire life and heard every damn animal in the woods I could ever hear, but I've never heard anything like that. We were all just petrified with fear, and then started hearing the twigs and leaves snapping like something was coming at us and definitely picking up the speed, but couldn't see where or what was coming. At that point, we all just made a run for it and just tore ass out of the mountains. Never been back to that area, and I don't think I ever will. Once saw my dead dog running around in circles at the end of our cul-de-sac where I used to live. He was a bright white, small dog. I only decided to check because I swore I heard sounds from outside. I was a stupid kid. I opened the front screen door, and when I peeked outside, there he was, circling around. As I was watching, he eventually started to quite literally fade away into thin air when I started to walk off the steps and go to him. Never ever could explain why or how that happened. Well, if you're going to have a paranormal experience, something like that would be comforting. So, he seemed like he was a happy pup.
So when I was a teen, I was staying with my grandmother in the house I grew up in. It was really late or early. I'd been staying up watching TV. Well, right as I was getting up to shut everything down for the night, I heard someone walking upstairs, like in hard sole shoes on the hard floor. Freaked me right out. Myself and my grandmother were the only ones there, and she was sound asleep. I finally got the courage to go check. Turned on all the lights on my way up, but nothing. All windows were locked, attic space was secured, no explanation. I mentioned it to my grandmother a few days later, and she acted like it was nothing new. Really had me freaked out for a while. Back in 2017, my family and I had moved into this apartment complex that was probably a decade new. Nothing really nice out of the ordinary, as it was a fairly modern development. One afternoon, though, my brothers, stepdad, and I were standing around in the kitchen talking when all of a sudden took notice of a small saucer move and rotate across my kitchen countertop for a full 10 to 15 seconds, then come to a dead stop. We were silent for a few seconds more, all looked at each other and tried debunking what we just saw. I never had the feeling the apartment we lived in had such an eerie or unexplainable energy to it. As I mentioned, it was a new place. But it was confirmed that there was a presence in that apartment, something none of us could explain. Come to find out that the apartment complex and all surrounding stores in the area had been built on Olan indigenous land. Nothing spooky about that at all, right? This is not my only story. I have a few more that I can get more detailed about. Just recently, I was working out. We have this space in the basement where you can spread out a bit. I was doing Pilates, and I see this figure come up beside me, and it's looking at me. I don't turn to look at it, thinking if I ignore it, it will go away. About 5 minutes later, I can see this shadow come walk up to me, and I glance up, thinking it's my mom, but no one's there. I lower my head again, and can see the shadow circles around me. I once again ignore it, but I'm getting more scared. The final straw for me was when I had my leg extended and it grabbed hold of my heel, trying to drag me back. I swear I never ran so fast up the stairs in my life. This is from memory from a long time ago. Obviously, it didn't change my mind on the paranormal not existing, but it is genuinely the least explainable thing that happened to me. My first girlfriend was into tarot for whatever reason. We were both atheist or agnostic, but for some reason, she liked it. So we read tarot a lot. We kept a diary of the reads and would try different ways to shuffle and switch decks and or read for each other. She liked some sort of modified Celtic cross reading, I think, and over the first 4 months of our relationship, for whatever reason, every reading of her had the 8 of Swords come up in either the past slot or the slot that inhibited her future. It's usually associated with being like something oppressing you or trapping you or things like that. For those who don't look at the link, it's often depicted as someone surrounded by a fence of blades. It was especially weird as I never pulled that card even when using the same deck frequently, and I'd usually pull a pretty random mix of cards. After 4 months, she got depressed about it, and we stopped reading. But about a month later, a lot of shit came out. It turned out she had been abused by some pedo online since she was 12, and he'd literally told her and convinced her he was the only reason she could be loved, so she owned and owed him things. One of those things was broadcasting our first sexual experiences to him over webcam. It was so weird, as her brain seemed to short circuit around him. I didn't get it at the time, but she'd act really weird after talking to him and have huge memory lapses around those times too. The weirdest effing thing, though, was in her gathering incriminating logs against him so she could report him to CPS. She found messages between them where the one time they met up and he gifted her the main tarot deck she used, the 8 of Swords, somehow ended up getting lost under his hotel bed, which he found just as he was leaving and had to ship to her later. Sadly, the relationship couldn't survive the trauma, though we tried, and the guy is still free because the CPS agent we went to lost the evidence and gave a completely contradictory statement to the police to what my ex said to her, making any case against him impossible. It turned out years later, just happening on Reddit, that the CPS agent was involved in a prostitution ring that involved children. So unfortunately, I can guess where all the webcam videos and nude pics went. TL, DR. X pulled the 8 of Swords during tarot readings consistently for 4 months, regardless of deck or shuffling, and it turned out she was being manipulated by a pedophile who gifted her her main deck, and that same card had been lost under his bed the one time they met up. When I was a kid, I was sharing a hotel room with my dad and my brother. In the middle of the night, I woke up to some voices having a conversation, and they were clearly in our room. I couldn't understand anything they were saying. It sounded a lot like Portuguese, which is my first language, but the words were weird. I sat on the bed, so not sleep paralysis, and listened for a bit, but still couldn't understand. I then freaked out and turned to my dad to call him. But moments before I say anything, one of the voices says, "Geronimo," a bit louder, and they stopped. I don't know why this word was said, so don't ask me, haha. I then woke my dad up, and he said it was just a dream. I didn't sleep again that night. Now, I don't really believe in ghosts or anything, but that one was hard to explain. I was about 8 or 9. There's a local theme park, and I remember going to a new haunted ride on its opening day. You had to pay actual cash at this theme park. You usually buy ride tickets. I went on, and it had a lot of Jason references. It's like a mine cart you ride and see bad animatronic experiences that spook you. Well, the first thing I locked onto was a scarecrow, kind of how you'd expect. Big pumpkin head, red fiery eyes, swinging a scythe. Something about it I just couldn't handle. I screamed and cried so much they shut down the ride so I could get off and my mother could take me home. I was a latchkey kid, so my mom left me home that night and went back to the theme park. My bed was right next to the window that led out to the neighbor's driveway. I saw the scarecrow out there. I quickly went under my blankets and after some time peeked to see him at my window. I don't know if this really happened, but this is how I remember it. And what I do know is that I slept beneath my bed from that day onward for a year straight, under the bed frame, and sometimes would do it on and off again throughout my life until I got way fatter.
I mean, that sounds like some good classic kid trauma. I had an experience where I watched the original Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 8 or 9. Definitely too young to watch it. I think I slept with a light on for I don't know, 8 straight years till I was in my teens. So that was cool.
I worked in funeral homes for 13 years. We had just finished a night visitation for an old widow. I was vacuuming up as I always did after a visitation. I'm focusing on my work, and out of the corner of my eye, see a man in a suit sitting on a couch in the room where the old window lay in her casket. The vacuum always made a terrible racket, and you had to step on a lever near the floor to turn it off. So I put my eyes on that lever, stepped on it, and looked up to tell the man that visitation is over. No man. So real it sent shivers down my spine. 13 years in funeral homes, only that once did see something otherworldly. When I was about 7 to 9, 2007 to 2009, I lived with my family in North Carolina. My grandmother on my dad's side of the family lived not far away in Virginia Beach, Virginia. One summer, we drove down to visit her for a week or so and came back home relatively late at night. As my brother and I go into our shared bedroom at the time to set our bags down and get ready to go to the bed, we had gone into my parents' bedroom for one reason or another, and my mom and dad were checking the voicemails on the landline phone. My mom has always been very adamant about having a landline in the house. As my mom was flipping through the voicemails, she came across this one that was what sounded like a child's voice singing in Spanish. My mother's native language is Spanish, and her side of the family is Cuban, so she was able to translate it. The translation was roughly along the lines of, "I hope you die in suffering." There was no callback number, and my mom was never able to find out who left the message, whose voice it was, or what it meant. Something about the whole thing absolutely terrified me, and I had a hard time sleeping that night. I recently visited my parents' house, not the same state, last month for a few days, before heading back home after a work trip, and brought it up with my mom to see if she remembers it as well as I do, and she said she vaguely remembers it. It's still one of my creepiest memories, and freaks me out to this day. Out on a night drive with my girlfriend, we like to visit old places, ruins, castles, churches, etc. during these trips sometimes. This time, it was an old castle with a park adjacent to it. We got out of the car and started to take a stroll around until we both suddenly felt something watching us. Neither of us said a word at the time, but we both simultaneously spun around and pointed our flashlights at exactly one window of a nearby castle grounds building. That window was black, like the other windows were also unlit and dark with nothing visible inside, but none of these felt as dark as that one. We didn't go closer to that building. We took a turn that would bring us closer to our car again, and it felt like it was coming closer. By the feel at that point about 50 meters behind us. I lit up the window again that was so dark, and the darkness was no longer there. The road behind us was. Needless to say, we went to the car and got the F out of there. It took almost half an hour before the intense feeling of being followed became more distant and eventually subsided, but it was nonetheless very, very scary.
There's something to be said about that eerie feeling. That you both turned and faced the same window at the same time, assuming there are more than one, is interesting. I've felt that before in my life once or twice, but not to that level, so probably good that you got out of there.
Not really paranormal per se. One day when I was 15, I had to go downtown, which meant phone up for a taxi. I didn't phone for one straight away because I had to get showered and dressed first. When I finished getting ready, I went downstairs to phone for a taxi. However, as soon as I picked up the phone, a taxi arrived for me. Driver said my name. I got in and asked who phoned for the taxi. The driver said he wasn't sure because he was given a name, but it was a woman's voice. Hearing that, the only person it could have been was my mother. Wrong. I got home later and said thanks for phoning the taxi. It arrived at the perfect time. She asked what I was talking about. I said the taxi that you phoned for me. She didn't phone for a taxi. She didn't ask someone to phone for a taxi for me. This was over 12 years ago, and I still don't know who phoned the taxi for me that arrived at the perfect time.